just gonna preface this by saying my hair is gonna be crazy through this video because I took a shower and I don't have time to style it or let it dry fully. So it's like half dry right now. But you may have clicked on this video and been like, a March wrap up almost 2 weeks into April? What's up with that? Morgan, why did it take you so long? You just did. I've been busy. Welcome to my March wrap up. I read 9 books in March, which wasn't as much as I was hoping. I'm a little disappointed by how many I read. I thought it would be more going into March, but like at the same time, it's still a really good number, okay? I think I'm just upset because I read 15 books in February and totally thought I would read the same amount in March, but I didn't. But it's okay, It's not that big of a deal. I went through like a mini reading slump because I got caught up on one book and was having a hard time finishing it, and then we'll get into it. 9 books, 7 of them were physical, 2 were on my Kindle, 6 were from my March TBR, which if you didn't watch that video, I did the TBR jar with the prompts and picked out books. I picked out 8 prompts, but I only read 6 of those books. And then for total pages read, 3,433. Not bad, to be honest. I don't normally keep track of pages. This is my first time, so I don't know if that's like an average for me or not. We'll find out. Without further ado, now that I'm done rambling, let's get into the actual books I read. The first book I read in March was Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the second book in the Letters of Enchantment duology. The Letters of Enchantment duology is a young adult fantasy series about Iris and Roman. They're rival journalists at this newspaper. They're both fighting for the same position. However, at the same time all this is happening, there is a war going on, and it's not just like a normal war, it's a war between 2 gods who have come back from being in like an eternal sleep kind of thing, and so they're fighting, and Roman and Iris get caught up in this. I really loved book 1. I read it for the best books of 2023 video that I did because it won the Goodreads Choice Award for Best Young Adult Fantasy, I believe, and I really loved that book. It had me like kicking my feet and giggling. The romance is just so good. It has like anonymous identity trope in it where they write letters back and forth, and it's just so cute and I loved it. And so I was really excited to pick up the second book, which is Ruthless Vows, and it definitely was really good still. It just wasn't as good as the first one, I think, because it focused a lot more on kind of the lore behind the gods and the war itself. And I, to be honest, was kind of reading for the romance. It wasn't like my absolute favorite, definitely not my favorite out of the duology. I think I gave this a 4.5 stars. When I first read it, looking back on it, it's probably like closer to a 4 stars, but I still really loved all this lore we got between the gods. I also wasn't in love with the epilogue. I was expecting a little bit more out of that epilogue and we didn't get very much, but it's okay. And my favorite quote from this, it says, "You may not be a goddess, but nor am I a god. Despite our mundane lives, perhaps we make our own magic with words." Beautiful. The writing in this duology is actually super lyrical sometimes for being a young adult book, which is really cool. So yeah, that was the first book I had read in March. The next book I read was The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston? One of those two. This is an adult magical realism romance type of thing. Clementine inherits an apartment from her aunt who recently passed away. Her and this aunt were really close. They traveled the world together. And so she's kind of grieving the loss of this person who meant so much to her, and she moves into this apartment and finds out that it is indeed a magical apartment that transports you in time by 7 years. I think you can tell where it goes from there. This was so cute. I love this book. I loved reading this book. I had such a great time. I think the writing in this book and Ashley's writing in general is just so beautiful, and I really love how she explores like the theme of grief while also having this romance plot that really just tugs on your little heart. But yeah, I really loved this book. I ended up giving it a 4.5 stars, which I think is pretty accurate. I guess it just really didn't give me that like 5-star feeling. I still really loved it though. And even though the cover's kind of giving fall, it is set in the springtime in New York City. So yeah, there you go. And then my favorite quote from this book is, "Isn't it strange how the world works sometimes? It's never a matter of time, but a matter of timing." Highly, highly recommend if you're into romances. The next book I read was Pride and Premeditation by Tears of Price. This was the first book I read in my reading green book covers for a week video. This is a young adult murder mystery, and it is also a Jane Austen retelling, obviously for Pride and Prejudice, Pride and Premeditation. I really like the cute little play on words there. I think that's really cool. However, I did not love this book. I had well, let me tell you what it's about. Hold on. Slow the roll. I said this was a young adult murder mystery. Lizzie is an aspiring lawyer, and Darcy also happens to be a lawyer, and they are basically fighting over one case in which they have to solve a murder in order to get their client a non-guilty charge, in order to get their client off the case, not charged anymore. What's the word for that? I don't know. Regardless, Lizzie and Darcy are rivals. That's pretty much all you need to know about this, and they solve a murder case. I really had high hopes going into this because I really like Pride and Prejudice, the movie, and I thought that this would be really fun, especially as like a cozy mystery. I don't know why I didn't think this would be a thing. I don't know why I didn't think this would be a problem. However, knowing the characters from the movie, it makes this book really predictable because it's all the same characters. So you kind of have an idea of, oh, who committed the murder or who could have been, like, you know, the villains of this book. So it is a bit predictable, and I think that's why I struggled with it so much, because it was like a pretty fast read, especially because it is young adult. I think it was just too predictable for me. I ended up giving this a 2.5 stars. I don't really have much else to say. My favorite quote from this book is actually the very first line, and it goes, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a brilliant idea, conceived and executed by a clever young woman, must be claimed by a man." I thought that was a banger of a first line, okay? Especially because, you know, it follows the first line of the original book. So the next book I read for the same video was Final Offer by Lauren Asher. I read this one on my Kindle. This is the third book in the Dreamland Billionaires trilogy. That trilogy just follows a group of 3 brothers while they have to complete tasks that are unique to each of them that were given to them by their grandfather in order to get their inheritance, basically. This is definitely a trilogy for like Disney adults because it is an adult romance book. The Dreamland in the title of the trilogy is basically Disneyland. It's an amusement theme park for children that has princesses and princes and stuff like that. Final Offer is the third book. I think I already mentioned that. And that one follows Cal, which is the middle brother, and his task is to sell his grandfather's summer lake cabin. When he goes to do that, he runs into a little snafu because his childhood friend and ex-girlfriend Alana is living there. I really had high hopes going into this book because I gave the other books in the series 4 stars, Terms and Conditions being my favorite one, which is the second one, and I was severely disappointed. I ended up giving this book 2 stars, and I feel like that probably isn't a fair rating. I feel like it might be a little too low because I still read it fast and I was glad to see like this conclusion to the trilogy. However, the main female character, the FMC, if you will, so mean to the main male character. I couldn't get over how mean she was. And it wasn't just her. The lake house cabin type thing is in a small town, and every single person in that small town was also mean to the main character. I was really excited to read about Cal. I thought he was like the most charismatic out of all the brothers. Everyone was so mean to him that it was just making me too annoyed to read like the whole time. I had to put it down because I was just getting super frustrated by the way everyone was treating him. And if you've read the book and you've loved it, please don't like hate me for saying that I didn't like it. It was still like a decent conclusion to the trilogy. I just wish it was a little different. My favorite quote from that book was, "Falling in love with yourself is 10 times harder than falling in love with someone else, especially when I don't like myself very much." And then the next book I read was also on my Kindle. It was The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is a young adult mystery type book, has a lot of puzzles and a dark academia vibe in it. It follows Avery as she randomly one day gets a huge inheritance from a man she never knew, and in order to receive this inheritance she has to live in his house with his family for a year. Her and his 4 grandsons are trying to figure out why she got all the inheritance money and the rest of his family did not get anything. I really enjoyed this one. I thought this was so much fun. I'm a huge fan of puzzles and stuff like that. I really like escape rooms. I think those are a ton of fun. So I just really was just having so much fun while I was reading this book. I thought the vibe was immaculate. I ended up giving this one, I think, I want to say like a 4 stars, 4.5 maybe. I think the only thing I struggled with was like some of the characters were a little annoying. Like they did not need to be the way they were. But other than that, I really loved it. I thought the puzzles were super fun and I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of the series. And my favorite quote from that one was, "Everything's a game, Avery Grams. The only thing we get to decide in this life is if we play to win." The last book I read for the Reading Green Book covers for a week was At the Hour Between Dog and Wolf by Tara Eisen. This is a historical fiction book set in World War II France. It follows Danielle, who she is Jewish, and after the German soldiers invade Paris, her mom takes her to a distant family friend in rural France. Danielle basically has to adapt to this Catholic rural way of life. It was a really difficult read, both in the fact that it was like a really emotional read, obviously because you're reading about World War II and, you know, being a Jewish person in hiding during that time. I felt like the middle part ran on a little bit. It felt a little slow. I didn't 100% love this book. This was the book that put me into a little bit of a reading slump, just because I don't know if I was ready to read about this kind of topic, and so I didn't want to pick up the book. I ended up giving this one a 3.5 stars. It's still really good, don't get me wrong. The themes in this book, amazing. In terms of like literary technique, this was a beautifully written book. I know my synopsis wasn't very good. It's so hard to like synopsize this book, you know what I mean? My favorite quote was, "They tell you what to think about right and wrong, about people, who's okay, who's not okay, and you're just a kid so you don't know. The words seem important, so you say them back. You think you're talking like a grown-up. And they nod, they get all happy with you and proud. So that means it's the truth, right?" I would definitely recommend this book if you're into historical fictions, especially from this time period. It felt a little bit slow in the middle and it was also really emotional. So that's why I think I rated it so... And it's not even that low. It's not a low rating. That's just why I rated it 3.5 stars. The next 2 books I read were for my books versus movie video that I like just put out last week. It's a part 2 because I did that video before. But the first book I read for that video was Water for Elephants by Sarah Gruen. This is also a historical fiction and it's set in the 1920s. Jacob is in college to become a veterinarian when his parents pass away a week before his finals, and they left him with nothing because of course it is during the Great Depression era. All the monies went straight to the banks. He was left with no money, no house, nothing, and so he runs away before he is able to finish his finals, and he ends up joining a circus. It was a really good book. However, check the trigger warnings because there are 3 different trigger warnings, and I'll put them on the screen that really like when I was reading the book, you know what I mean? Like I was flabbergasted. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it 4 stars. My favorite part of this book is the fact that it is dual timeline because it also has Jacob in a timeline that takes place in the present. Oh my goodness, him as an old man just like had my heartstrings tugging every which way. I definitely have a few quotes from that, but my favorite quote, I think, out of the whole thing was, "The whole thing's illusion, Jacob, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's what people want from us. it's what they expect. The next book I read was Bridge to Terabithia by Catherine Patterson. This is basically like a children's classic book by now. This is about Jess and Leslie, who pretty much social outcasts in this small town, small like rural town, and they find a friendship with each other, and that's basically all you need to know. I think this is definitely a book where you should just go into it knowing nothing and just see where it takes you. If you know, you know. I really liked this book. I gave it, I think, 4.5 stars. There is a lot of bullying, specifically around characters being called fat, which I didn't love, but you know, time period or whatever. But other than that, like, it's super short and sweet and simple, and it was a really great read. My favorite quote from this one was, "She was his other, more exciting self, his way to Terabithia and all the worlds beyond." And then the last book I ended up reading this month was Powerless. This was not for the books versus movies. I didn't finish that book, the last book for that video, until April. This is a fantasy romance. I think it's young adult. I was sold this book because people said it was like the Hunger Games, but make it fantasy. Like, I get where they're coming from for sure with that. I don't know if it's like 100% the vibe of this book. In this world, there are people called elites who have powers, and then there are people called ordinaries who do not have powers. And ordinaries are for not having powers. They're banned from society. If they are caught, they will be killed. Peyton is an ordinary, but she is hiding in the slums of this world city. She basically tries to pass an elite with a psychic ability, and one day she saves the prince, which lands her into this thing called the Purging Trials. The Purging Trials are kind of like the Hunger Games, where you basically you're given challenges and you basically have to fight to survive. However, it's not like only one man standing kind of thing. People die. You also don't like have to die, basically. Like, you can still live. Multiple people can survive this thing. I don't want to say that spoilers. However, I felt like I did not get a clear explanation as to what the trials were until like 200 pages into the book. And this is almost, I think it's like 400 something, almost 500 pages. There's also a little romance subplot going on here. There's an enemies to lovers trope in here. I gave this book 4 stars. The only thing I did not like about it was that it took me a little bit to get into, and I just was not certain what the trials were. I don't know how to explain other than I was just really confused for the first 200 pages until I understood what the trials were, and then I was like, oh, okay, gotcha. Other than that, I really, really like this book. The banter in this book, oh my gosh, I ate it right up. Those were the 9 books I read this month. That was a lot. It was a lot to go through. So I'm kind of glad I didn't read 15 books, or else that would have been a really, really long video. And hopefully this one isn't too long. Let me know what you read in March. What was your favorite book from March? And thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!